guys on the Class A. And I'd like to let you guys know that before we start our inspection, the first thing we do when we get to the DMV is have the instructor check our lights for us. Now the lights that we're going to have them check for us are going to be our left turn signal, our right turn signal, our emergency lights. Then we're going to turn on the parking light, which is the center. It turns on all the lights except for the headlights. And then you push it forward and that activates your headlights. And then the instructor is going to go to the back of the truck. You're going to perform all of the same things, and you're going to step on the brake as well so they can see that it's working properly. And please make sure this is the first thing you guys do when you guys get to the DMV to perform your outside inspection test. If you do not, it will be an automatic minus 10 points. Now, once you are done checking the lights with the DMV instructor, you're going to come outside and you're going to say, now I'm going to be performing my outside inspection for my Class A license. I'm going to start at the top with all my ID lights. They're properly mounted, no loose or missing screws, no cracks, no missing bulbs, amber in color, working properly. I have my windshield. It's clean with no cracks. My wiper arms and blades are secure and operate smoothly. I have my convex mirrors. They're properly mounted, clean with no cracks. There's no loose or missing bolts on the brackets, and there's no bends, cracks, or any illegal welds. Coming down, I have my headlights, my high and low beams, my right turn signal, my left turn signal, and my four-way flashers. They're properly mounted, no loose or missing screws, no cracks, no missing bulbs, amber and clear in color, working properly. Next, I have my bumper. It's properly mounted, no loose or missing bolts, no bends, cracks, or any illegal welds, and no extra holes. I have my license plate. It's properly mounted, no loose or missing screws, clean, current registration, present, and visible. Underneath the truck, I'll be checking for any oil leaks or contamination of any kind. Next, I'm going to come over here and unlatch the hood latch guard and explain. So I have my hood latch guard. It's properly mounted with no loose or missing bolts, no cracks or tears on the rubber. I have my left turn signal. It's properly mounted, no loose or missing screws, no cracks, no missing bulbs, amber in color, working properly. Now coming over to the right side, I have my right turn signal, no loose or missing screws, no cracks, no missing bulbs, amber in color, working properly. And then I will unlatch this side of the hood latch guard. Now when coming to the front of the truck, please make sure you guys put both hands on the hood, place your knee on the bumper, and pull back. Now I'm going to start with my passenger side. I have my air filter. It's properly mounted. There's no loose or missing bolts, no cracks, and the filter is clean. Next, I have my radiator. It's properly mounted. There's no loose or missing bolts, no cracks or leaks. The hoses have no cuts or leaks, and my clamps are tight and secure. I have my serpentine belt, which is behind this hose right here. It operates two components, my alternator and my water pump, which is below it. My serpentine belt is properly mounted. There's no more than 3/4 of an inch of plate at the center of the belt. There's no cracks or tears on the rubber. And it's not dangerously thin. I have my alternator. It's properly mounted. There's no loose or missing bolts. There's no cracks or bends. The wires are secured. They're not cut or frayed. Underneath the alternator, I have my water pump. It's properly mounted. No loose or missing bolts. No cracks or leaks. The hoses have no cuts or leaks. And my clamps are tight and secure. Over here I have my turbo. It's properly mounted. There's no loose or missing bolts. No cracks or leaks. The hose has no cracks or leaks. And my clamps are tight and secure. Underneath the truck, I have my oil filter. It's tight with no leaks. Then I come over to the driver's side. And when I come over here, the first thing I want to say is that my air compressor and my power steering are both gear driven. My air compressor is properly mounted. There's no loose or missing bolts. There's no cracks or leaks. The hoses and air lines have no cuts or leaks, and my fittings are tight and secure. Underneath, you just point. Your power steering is properly mounted. There's no loose or missing bolts. There's no cracks or leaks. The hoses have no cuts or leaks, and my clamps are tight and secure. Coming over here, I have my oil filler and dipstick. It is properly mounted. There's no loose or missing bolts. There's no cracks or leaks. The cap is on tight. The oil level's been checked, and it is above the refill mark. I have my coolant reservoir. It's properly mounted. There's no loose or missing bolts. There's no cracks or leaks. The cap is on tight. The hoses have no cuts or leaks. My clamps are tight and secure, and the fluid level has been checked. I have my power steering pump reservoir. It's properly mounted. There's no loose or missing bolts. There's no cracks or leaks. The cap is on tight. The hoses have no cuts or leaks. My clamps are tight and secure, and the fluid level has been checked. I have my windshield washer reservoir. It's properly mounted. There's no loose or missing bolts. There's no cracks or leaks. My hoses have no cuts or leaks. And my cap is on tight. And the fluid level has been checked. I have my steering rod. It's properly mounted. There's no loose or missing bolts. There's no bends, cracks, or any illegal welds. And my couplings or U-joints are properly greased and free of debris. Next, I have my steering box. It's properly mounted. There's no loose or missing bolts. There's no cracks or leaks. The hoses have no cuts or leaks, and my clamps are tight and secure. I have my shock absorber. It is properly mounted. No loose or missing bolts. No cracks or leaks. I have my mounting and mounting bolt. It's properly mounted. There's no loose or missing bolts. There's no bends, cracks, or any illegal welds. I have my leaf springs. It's properly mounted. There's no loose or missing leaf springs, and there's no bends, cracks, or any illegal welds. I have my U-bolts. They're properly mounted. There's no loose or missing bolts. There's no bends, cracks, or any illegal welds. I have my steering linkage, rod, and arm. It's properly mounted. There's no loose or missing bolts. There's no bends, cracks, or any illegal welds. And there's no loose or missing cotter pins. I have my tie rod and arm. It's properly mounted. There's no loose or missing bolts. There's no bends, cracks, or any illegal welds. And there's no loose or missing cotter pins. I have my brake chamber or my S-cam brake. It is properly mounted. There's no loose or missing bolts. There's no cracks or leaks. My hoses have no cuts or leaks, and my fittings are tight and secure. I have my brake adjuster or slack adjuster and push rod. There's no loose, missing, broken parts, and there's no more than 1 inch when pulled by hand. I have my brake drum properly mounted. There's no bends, cracks, or any rust. I have my brake lining. It's not dangerously thin, not less than 1/4 inch thin. There's no contamination of oil or grease of any kind. I have my splash guard. It's properly mounted. There's no loose or missing bolts. There's no cracks or tears. And it's approximately 8 inches from the tire and 4 inches from the ground and not rubbing against the tire. I have my steering tire. It is properly mounted. It is a minimum of 4 30-second tread depth. It's checked with an air pressure gauge at 95 psi. There's no cracks, cuts, nails, or any damage to the side of the tire wall. I have my rim. It's properly mounted. There's no bends, cracks, or any rust. There's no loose or missing lug nuts and no rust around the lug nuts. I have my hub oil seal. It is properly mounted. There's no loose or missing bolts. There's no cracks or leaks. The oil level's been checked and it's always clean. I have my air valve. The cap is on tight. There's no leaks. Next, I come to my mirror, my mirrors, and my mirror brackets. My mirrors are clean with no cracks, and my mirror brackets are properly mounted with no loose or missing bolts. There's no bends, cracks, or any illegal welds. My door latch, and door lock is properly mounted. There's no bends, cracks, or any illegal welds, and it opens and closes properly from the outside. Next, I have my brackets. They're properly mounted, no loose or missing bolts, no bends, cracks, or any illegal welds. Inside I have my emergency equipment, my fire extinguisher, which is fully charged and ready to use, with my 3 red reflective triangles, and extra fuses over there. I have my driver handle. It is properly mounted. There's no loose or missing bolts. There's no bends, cracks, or any illegal welds on it. I have my driver steps. They're properly mounted. There's no loose or missing bolts. There's no bends, cracks, or any illegal welds. And they're always clean. I have my fuel tank. It is properly mounted. There's no loose or missing bolts. There's no cracks or leaks. The straps are on secure. Cap is on tight. And my wires are secured. And my hoses have no cuts or leaks on them. I have my battery box and cover. It is properly mounted. There's no loose or missing bolts. There's no bends, cracks, or any illegal welds on the cover. The battery caps are present. The cell connections are tight. There's fluid level's been checked, and there's no corrosion. Next, I have my air tank. It's properly mounted. There's no loose or missing bolts. There's no bends, cracks, or any leaks. And the hoses have no cuts or leaks. And the fittings are tight and secured. I have my 3 lines. I have my electrical line, I have my emergency line, and I have my service line. They're all properly mounted with no loose or missing bolts and connected to the tractor. And my hoses have no cuts, no leaks. They're not dangled, torn, frayed, and they're not dragging around the exhaust system. And they're properly connected to the glad hands with no leaks. I have my tractor frame and cross member. It is properly mounted. There's no loose or missing bolts, no bends, cracks, or any illegal welds, and no extra holes. I have my catwalk. It is properly mounted. There's no loose or missing bolts, no bends, cracks, or any illegal welds, and always clean. Underneath your catwalk, you have your air dryer. It is properly mounted. There's no loose or missing bolts. There's no cracks or leaks. The hoses have no cuts or leaks, and my fittings are tight and secure. I have my drive shaft. It's properly mounted. There's no loose or missing bolts. There's no bends, cracks, or any illegal welds. And my couplings or U-joints are properly greased and free of debris. I have my exhaust system. It is properly mounted. There's no loose or missing bolts. There's no bends, cracks, or any illegal welds. My straps are secure, and there's no carbon soot or any lines dragging around or near it. Moving on, I have my running light. It is properly mounted. There's no loose or missing screws, no cracks, no missing bulbs, amber in color, working properly. I have my release arm. It is in the fully engaged position. It's not bent, broken, twisted, or there's no loose or missing parts on it. I have my pin properly mounted, no bends, cracks, or any illegal welds, and my cotter pins secured. I have my fifth wheel. It's properly mounted with no loose or missing bolts. There's no gap or crack between the fifth wheel and the trailer, and it's properly greased. I have my fifth wheel structure. It is properly mounted. There's no loose or missing bolts, no bends, cracks, or any illegal welds on it. I have my airbag. It's properly mounted. There's no loose or missing bolts. There's no cracks, tears, or any leaks. Coming underneath, I have my kingpin. It is properly mounted. There's no bends, cracks, or illegal welds. I have my locking jaw, which is fully closed around the kingpin. There's no bends, cracks, or illegal welds on it. I have my aprons. They're properly mounted. There's no bends, cracks, or illegal welds. Right here, I have my tongue drawbar. It is properly mounted. There's no bends, cracks, or illegal welds. It's not bent or twisted. I have my park, brake, signal, and four-way flash lights and my reverse lights. They're properly mounted with no loose or missing screws, no cracks, no missing bulbs, red and clear in color, and my wires are secured and not frayed. I have my trailer frame and cross member properly mounted, no loose or missing bolts, no bends, cracks, or illegal welds, and no extra holes. Over here I have my landing gear. My landing gear is fully raised and my crank handle is secure. My landing gear is properly mounted with no loose or missing bolts, no bends, cracks, or illegal welds. And my frame support is properly mounted with no loose or missing bolts, and there's no bends, cracks, or illegal welds on them. Now coming out over here, this is where we are going to transition. You guys have this in your inspection paper. The transition is basically stating the same parts that you would be checking for that are from the steering axle to the drive axle. So what I'm going to say is now I will be transitioning from my steering axle to my drive axle. I will be checking for the same damages on my mounting and mounting bolts, my leaf springs, my U-bolts, my brake chamber, my brake adjuster, my brake drum, my brake lining, my brake hoses and fittings, my rim, my lug nuts, my air valve, splash guards, and shock absorber. The differences are the torque bar, properly mounted, no loose or missing bolts, no bends, cracks, or any illegal welds. The brake rod, properly mounted, there's no bends, cracks, and properly greased. I have the space between my tires, which is a minimum of 4-inch gap. There's no trash or debris of any kind in between, always clean. I have my tires, which are a minimum of 2/32 tread depth, checked with an air pressure gauge at 95 psi, checking for any nails, cuts, or any damage to the side of the tire bowl. I have my axle seal. It is properly mounted, properly greased, with no loose or missing bolts, or bends, cracks, or any illegal welds on it. I have my reflectors. All my reflectors are present and visible, clear and red in color. The top of my flatbed is free of debris and trash. There's no loose or missing bolts. There's no bends, cracks, or any illegal welds. Rear, I have my turn signal and my running light. It's properly mounted, no loose or missing screws, no cracks, no missing bulbs, and both are amber in color. Now, coming to the back over here, this is where you guys are going to transition again, and you will have that in your inspection paper as well. The transition is again stating the same parts that you would be checking for from the steering and drive axle that would be back here on the rear axle. Then you will be naming the differences. So when we do the transition, we're going to say, now I'm going to transition from my drive axle to my rear or third axle. I will be checking for the same damages on my leaf springs, U-bolts, brake chamber, brake adjuster, brake lining, brake drum, brake hoses and fittings, brake rod, my torque bar, my tires, the space between my tires, my rim, my lug nuts, my air valve, and my splash guard. The differences are the mounting, which is properly welded. There's no bends, cracks, or any illegal welds. The crossbar, which is properly welded. There's no bends, cracks, or any illegal welds. And the hub oil seal. It is properly mounted. There's no loose or missing bolts. There's no cracks or leaks. Oil level's been checked, and it's always clean. I have my ABS light and my running light. They're properly mounted, no loose or missing screws, no cracks, no missing bulbs, amber and red in color, working properly. Now when we come to the back of the trailer and the truck, the first thing we want to do is lean with your hands out and say that your truck and trailer is not leaning towards any one direction. If they ask you why it is leaning, then you may tell them that there is a suspension problem. But if they don't ask you, just continue with your inspection and start off at the top with your reflectors. They're properly mounted, They're clear in red in color, present and visible. I have my park, brake, emergency, and signal lights. They're properly mounted. There's no loose or missing screws. There's no cracks, no missing bulbs. They're red in color, working properly. I have my running lights. They're properly mounted, no loose or missing screws, no cracks, no missing bulbs, red in color, working properly. I have my trailer license plate. It's properly mounted. There's no loose or missing bolts. It's present and visible and current registration. I have my DOT bumper. It is properly mounted. There's no loose or missing bolts, no bends, cracks, or any illegal welds on it. Now we're going to transition from the left side of our truck to the right side of our truck. When you transition, it is very important for you to say to the DMV instructor is that now I will be transitioning from the left side of my truck to the right side of my truck. I will be checking for the same damages on all of my lights and all of my reflectors and all of my axles. And this completes my outside inspection for my Class A license.